Good morning, I'm Tamara Shoemaker. I've got a nerdy post this morning, so fair warning. It contains books, it contains the rantings of a bibliophile, that is me, and literary allusions and young adult novels and mentions of the ever-popular love triangles. So, you have been warned, so let's move on. I have some friends who are absolutely outraged by this. It's kind of funny, but I freely admit it. Anytime I get a shiny new book and I'm ready to read it, I always go to the last page and I skim over it. And I know some of you are going to want to throw your stones. It's okay. Go ahead. I can handle it. But why do I do that? It's because I want to understand from the get-go what or who I'm supposed to like, who I'm supposed to root for. Because if I end up liking the wrong person, it's like a tiny little death when I realize that their flaws are too great, right? And they're not going to get redeemed by the end of the book. So I want to be prepared and, actually start to prepare myself to like the correct person. So some of the love triangle books that I've read because of their love triangles, and I've enjoyed those, are Hunger Games, Twilight, I know, The Host, City of Bones, Outlander. And I admit to reading even older classic books for the same type of thing, for love triangles, like Jane Eyre. You have Edward Rochester and St. John Rivers in that one. Pride and Prejudice, Mr. Darcy and Mr. Wickham. Tale of Two Cities, Sidney Carton and Charles Darnay. Gone with the Wind, Ashley Wilkes, Rhett Butler. So those are a few of the other ones that I've read because of those. The common element among all of those books are that I open to the last page first and I skim to save me from the heartbreak of wrapping myself up completely in a character whose flaws are fatal. And then it also comes with the bonus of keeping me from reading a book with a tragic ending. Two of those books that I listed were actually required reading for me in high school. Gone with the Wind, Tale of Two Cities. And since both of those ended not so well, they ended up on my to despise eternally list because I couldn't stop crying for days after those. They were hard reads. So, to note, in one of the book trilogies that I wrote, called Guardian of the Veil, for anybody interested, there is indeed a love triangle there. And here's a little bit of a spoiler, kind of, not really. The final page doesn't include either of the 2 points of that love triangle that have always revolved around the third point of the triangle. So the last page brought an answer that completely satisfied all the requirements of a young adult romance, but did not settle for the fatal flaws of either of the other 2 contenders of that triangle, who had been probabilities all along. So the one who got the girl came from the outside, but had actually been there all along, and that's kind of key. So I didn't mean to use my books as an example for this post, but it ended up actually being a pretty good example. So the parallel in the next paragraph of 1 Corinthians, it's actually chapter 2, verses 6 to 10. It's pretty cool. Instead of a light romance among flawed humanity, which is what all those books are that I just listed, we get a reference instead to the great romance that's between Jesus and his bride, those who are wise with the wisdom from God and not the false wisdom of this world. So Paul says, we do, however, speak a message of wisdom among the mature, but not the wisdom of this age or of the rulers of this age who are coming to nothing. That's 1 Corinthians 2, verse 6. So already in this verse, Paul draws the love triangle. We are one point on that triangle. So we are the main character in our own life stories. So go ahead, let's designate ourselves on this first point in the triangle, and then let's look at the other points. The next point, the wisdom of this age, and oh man, that one's super cute, right? It looks like, I don't know, like slicked back hair and highlighted, pieces of it, and a business suit, maybe some trendy designer glasses, right? Because look at where our money goes. It goes to higher education, to institutions where we learn to be erudite and use all that gray matter and fling around syllogisms and other points and forms of critical thinking and reasoning, right? That's wisdom of this age. So that's 2 points of the triangle. Here's the third, the rulers of this age. But we're a democracy, right? We don't have rulers. True in the US, other places there are some actual rulers. But this point on the triangle looks like senators, congressional leaders, presidents, state leaders, or, gasp, even Twitter rantists. Yeah, I just made up that word. Instagram protesters, Facebook philosophers. Tamara, I'm starting to point to myself. let me just note here, Tamara has no wisdom that comes from herself. Just let's make that straight right there. So, Paul, now we're stuck. We've got a triangle. We've got all 3 points filled in with faulty wisdom. Where does true wisdom come from? And Paul says in 1 Corinthians 2, verses 7 to 8, he says, no, we speak of God's secret wisdom, a wisdom that has been hidden and that God destined for our glory before time began. None of the rulers of this age understood it, for if they had, they would not have crucified the Lord of glory. Have you ever wondered? I have. Have you ever wondered why he carried through on his plan to crucify Jesus when he had a chance? Right? Didn't he know that doing so would seal his fatal destiny, right? His eventual and eternal ending in the lake of fire that has been prepared for him and for his followers? So here's our answer. God's wisdom was hidden from him. God's plan, destined before time began, was unknown to Satan, and he couldn't understand it. It reminds me of one of my favorite quotes from C.S. Lewis's The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. And Aslan's talking. He's the great lion, and in this allegorical story, he represents Jesus. But Aslan's talking. He says, it means that though the witch knew the deep magic, the witch represents Satan in this story, that though the witch knew the deep magic, there is a magic deeper still, which she did not know. Her knowledge goes back only to the dawn of time. But if she could have looked a little further back into the stillness and the darkness before time began, she would have read there a different incantation. She would have known that when a willing victim who has committed no treachery was killed in a traitor's stead, the table would crack and death itself would start working backward. Go read the book, y'all. It's excellent. That particular reference, that particular paragraph I just read is in allegorical fashion. It is the message of the cross that I just wrote about yesterday, stripping it down to only the message of the cross, to only Christ and him crucified. All right, so since all 3 points of the love triangle are filled up with, not so great pieces of worldly wisdom, where do we look? What do we look at? We've got point 1, point 2, point 3 all filled up. When all 3 points are faulty, what do? We look up, right? And that's right, up above us is the outside point, a point that makes this triangle we've been wrestling with into a pyramid. It gives it depth. So at that point of the pyramid, we get Paul's words. However, as it is written, no eye has seen, no ear has heard, no mind has conceived what God has prepared for those who love him. But God has revealed it to us by his Spirit. That's 1 Corinthians 2, verses 9 and 10. So as long as we are focusing on the other points of the triangle, we're going to get no nearer to wisdom, right? But looking up is where the answer is. In my Guardian of the Veil trilogy, the one that I mentioned earlier, the ultimate romance happened when my girl Elaine, who's the main character, stopped looking outside of her triangle, or the points on it, and focused instead on what had been there all along. But she couldn't see it until she looked for it. So going back to Paul, going back to no eye has seen, unless, let's not get too big for our britches or think that we know so much, right? No eye, no human eye, nor any aid to the eye, the most powerful microscope or the most powerful telescope ever created, ever made, no eye has seen. No ear, not even the best devices that science has produced that's brought in sounds from outer space, no ear has heard. No mind, not even the greatest theologians or apologists or philosophers that this world can produce, not even artificial intelligence or the most brainy computers or robots can produced by mankind. No mind has conceived what God has prepared for those who love him. But God has revealed it to us by his Spirit. And if his Spirit lives in you, we know him. We see him, we hear him, we understand the things that he wants us to understand. My kids ask me sometimes, Mommy, how do you hear God? Do you hear like a voice talking to you? And I say, no, you hear him with your heart. You listen with your heart. And it makes me laugh a little bit, I guess, kind of to see them concentrate really hard to try to listen with their heart. I know the idea makes no sense to minds glued to the natural world, but we have the mind of the Spirit. We have the mind of Christ. So rather than focusing on those other points in the triangle to knowledge and the rulers of this world, let's look up to the point of the pyramid, that is, to Christ. That's what I had for today. Hope you enjoyed it. I enjoyed going back into all my nerdy past with all the books that I love to read. But I think the point of the pyramid is Christ, and we need to keep our focus on him. All right, I will see you tomorrow.